Hello everyone and welcome in today's PECB webinar. My name is Gzim and I am the account manager for security portfolio at PECB, also the organizer of this webinar. I believe you all know that PECB organizes daily webinars in our 5 portfolios, and every week we organize a webinar on security portfolio covering different topics and areas. In this 30-minute webinar we will hear about web application, how penetration tests can improve your risk assessment. So this presentation will be hosted by our trainer and partner, Mr. Friedhelm Düsterhöft, who is the Managing Director of MSDD.net GmbH, offering IT security, consultancy and training services for international companies from IT, telecommunication and financial industry. He has also specialized on GRC topics around ISO 27001 and also has a long-term experience in vulnerability management and penetration testing. I hope you will enjoy this webinar and find it very informative. If you have any questions, you can write them in question box in right-hand control panel, or you can use the option to raise your hand and we will answer to all of them accordingly. Please, Friedhelm, you may continue.
Okay, thanks, Gzim. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining this webinar. It's about the linkage between penetration tests and risk assessments, and I would like to present you some things and some answers which might be not as easy to find usually. So I would like to just go into the situation. What are we talking about? Conducting periodic penetration tests has become a regulatory requirement nowadays for many companies. Many companies need to do penetration tests and they are forced to do that by regulation. However, there is a little gap when you are wanting to put a penetration pen testing program into practice. And that will be very practical questions, and I will concentrate on that on the following slides. Just as an introduction, I have prepared here 2 simple example slides. What are the regulation standards are saying about penetration testing? That is here taken from PCI DSS, and there's a clause 11.3, and it says implement a methodology for penetration testing that includes the following, and then a list of high-level topics comes up there. And also, interestingly, as a comment, there is written penetration testing techniques will be different for different organizations, and the type, depth, and complexity of the testing will depend on the specific environment and the organization's risk assessment. That means it just depends how to do that on the organization, and no much guidance here. Similar situation you see if you're looking at ISO 27001. There are a bunch of clauses which are dealing with some requirements, and interestingly the word penetration testing is not even mentioned there. However, it is mentioned that an organization needs to perform a risk assessment as a starting point, and that it has to define controls in order to implement measures to mitigate those risks. And from the context you can see that there is a need to do penetration testing, but again, nothing said how to do it. Just to make sure we are all on the same page, I have added here 2 definitions, because in everyday speech it's common that different people are talking about different things by using the same words. For example, when people are talking about penetration tests, they are often talking about over vulnerability assessment, in fact, or if they are talking or saying the word risk, they really mean threat or vulnerability or any mixture of these, and therefore I put those definitions here on that slide. A penetration test is a simulated attack, and we are doing that in order to figure out whether a security weakness, which just is another word for vulnerability, really exists and can be exploited. And why are we doing that? That is in the second definition, because we want to assess the risk, and there we again have the parameter vulnerability and also threats and exploits, and this needs to be calculated. All right. Just to stress a little bit the difference between penetration testing and vulnerability assessment. Mainly this definition here is taken from Wikipedia, so you can look it up for yourself also. There are two things that are that should be in focus. The first thing is we are doing penetration test in order to determine the feasibility of a particular set of attack vectors. That's the first thing. And the second thing which is important is that penetration testing usually is creative in combining several vulnerabilities found in order to get to a certain goal. When you're in the position of conducting a penetration test, you have to do a lot of things, and you have to make a lot of decisions, and some of the decisions are on what to test, and usually there are 4 areas to be distinguished, whether the object is a network security test or wireless or application. If you want to test your employees, so social engineering could be a part. You have to decide beforehand, and you have to hire the right people, and it's obvious that not every pen tester covers each sort of pen testing equally well. Also, you would have to decide whether you are doing a black box test or a white box test. The difference is black box test does not tell the test attacker anything beforehand. Whereas when you're doing a white box test, you are revealing your documentation, perhaps your source code, or your architecture, and therefore you give them a knowledge advantage. What is better, we are seeing in a moment. So as an overview, I've put together some questions for when setting up a pen testing program. What is important there to decide? You see 2 groups of bullet points here. The first 4 bullet points are dealing with the topics which are rather easy or more easy to answer, and for example, you have already answered them. It's about management commitments, so you need the person in charge or the committee in charge to allow the penetration test. You have to obey some regulatory and legal requirements. You have to choose a testing methodology. There is good reading in NIST 800-115 or BSI, which here means the Federal Office for Information Security, the German thing, not the British one, and also which types of penetration test you want to perform, whether you want to test your network or your application or both, or what else. These questions are pretty easy to answer, and there's a lot of literature on that, so no problem here. The more difficult questions are the latter 3, which are just noted here about which test method to apply. Are we doing a black box test or a white box test? Which resources are needed? How many testers do we need? And what skills do they need to have? And how to link what they are finding out to our risk management system. And I'll try to shed some light on the latter 3 questions in the following slides. Here comes already the first answer I have found, and I would like to present to you. It is taken from a technical report, a scientific study, which tried to answer some of those questions. And from that study, I've also taken some numbers that could give you an indication what to expect. So here the question was, what is better, black box testing or white box testing? The test set up from the scientific study was that source code review had been done by a group of testers, and this source code review could be used in a white box penetration test. In contrast, there was another test approach using a vulnerability scanner, and that is more a black box approach because it is not required that any knowledge of architecture, etc., is available beforehand. And the study found out that both testing approaches, Whitebox and Blackbox, had their own strengths and own weaknesses, and they differed in which kind of vulnerabilities to identify. The weakness of manual source code review is obvious. You need personnel, that costs time, and that costs money, and therefore it does not scale very well. Bottom line was there were more vulnerability found with a manual approach. However, there was also an overlap. That was the bottom line of the testing. Short answer to the question was we need them both. Another interesting question they looked on was what is a good criteria in order to determine the skill level of a penetration tester. And usually if you are hiring external people to do those tests, you would have to show them their CV and have perhaps do an interview, a self-assessment where they are telling what they have done before. And during that study it turned out that the results from these sorts of questions are nearly unrelated to their actual performance. So they are weak criteria, and a much better criteria would be if there would be something like a performance track record of the testers, where was known how they performed under a similar setup, and that could be easily extrapolated. However, obviously, this not always is not always available. But if, it would be best. So, next good question I think in that context would be, what do you think, what percentage of vulnerabilities could be identified using automated black box scanning or manual source code review on the other hand, both on a scale from null to 100, 0 to 100%. I think, Gizim, you have prepared that poll. We have it now. Okay.
And we have 70% of people responded, 67 voted for using automatic black box scanning, and 33% voted for using manual sources code review.
Okay. So now let's have a look at the numbers which the study came up with. That is here on this slide. The study found out that with manual source code review, 33% of the true vulnerabilities were detected at average by a tester, whereas with an automatic black box scanning about 20% was detected. If you sum up 20 and 33%, you end up with 53. However, the sum of both is 44%, and that is simply because there was some overlap between what the automated and what the manual tests found. That also means that 56% of real vulnerabilities stayed undetected. Another interesting thing this study found was that there were more vulnerabilities reported than actually did exist, and they contributed to some sort of which I called phantom risk. So they found vulnerabilities which weren't there because they misinterpreted some output of their tests. And that is also a thing because of the big percentage they found you might to take into account when evaluating penetration testing results. This slide here looks at the relationship of the number of testers and the vulnerability detection rate, and tries to answer the question, if one tester finds 33% of vulnerabilities with one pen test at average, how many, what is the detection rate of two testers? And from this graph you could easily see, okay, two testers, I should expect around 43%. If your goal would be to identify 95% of all vulnerabilities, you would have to employ 15 testers. As you see, the curve is less steep at the end, and each tester you add contributes less to the absolute number of vulnerabilities, and so you see it's not very economic if you try to scale it that way. So again, combining black box testing and white box testing could be a solution to that. Now we are coming to linking this insights more to risk management. The usual approach is that assess the risks involved with all reported vulnerabilities. But there are two more aspects we have learned to have a look on. There could be a portion of vulnerabilities you didn't detect, and also you should take into account that you have detected more vulnerabilities as those which are really there. And I therefore have modified a little bit the usual risk assessment formula as you find it perhaps in ISO 27005, which is on information security risk assessment, and I have added those values of the undetected vulnerabilities which were not reported, and also the false positives. Of course, you could do it in an Excel style sheet, like it's shown here. It is more or less taken literally from ISO 27005, where you have a risk matrix which takes into account three parameters. These parameters are the threat likelihood, the vulnerability level, and the other asset value. And if you have these three, you can look up an associated risk level. And from that risk level, you can decide whether the risk is acceptable or not, and how to handle it, and how this risk compares to just another risk. I have put in here the numbers from our case study. We had one code reviewer with a medium skill level and detection rate of 33%. The expected false positive rate was 49%, and the asset value I put in here 3 just as an example. And for that example asset, he reported 3 low vulnerabilities, 6 medium vulnerabilities, and 1 high vulnerability. I'm here in this area now. So with the parameters from which are given here, you can look up in the matrix here: medium likelihood, medium threat level, low vulnerability level, high vulnerability level, asset value 3. This is this line, and there you have the risk values 4, 5, and 6. If you multiply them with the number of vulnerabilities, you will get a score, and if you sum up each individual score, you end up with 48. So from what we are knowing beforehand was that we have omitted some risks and also have invented some risks. And if we have an estimate how these numbers are, then we can calculate some sort of projected risk that takes into account these model numbers. And if I do it here for the single medium skilled tester, then it would be likely that in reality there are 5 low vulnerabilities, 9 medium or 2 high vulnerabilities, and you can easily see that I would get an adjusted rank score, which could give you a better estimation of the real risk, taking into account that the penetration tester you have hired was not perfect, that he was not the best you could get, but you have some estimation how good he performs in general. Then you can extrapolate what he's doing and therefore get some numbers which might be more close to reality than before. So I think this was a lot of stuff in a very short time. I've spoken, I think, very quickly. To sum this up, I've put here the major insights from the study into a list. The hints are: use Blackbox and Whitebox testing complementary. When assessing risk from vulnerabilities discovered during pen tests, take into account how intensive you have searched for them. Means take into account the number of testers you have hired and their skill level. Have calibrated matrix to calculate projected risk. So know how good the numbers are you are getting from the testers. And most important, the last one, the best way to deal with vulnerabilities is to adjust processes in a way that the root causes are eliminated. Just fixing is not enough, also seen frequently. So thank you for your attention, and I think we have some minutes left to answer some questions. If you could collect them and ask those questions, I would be happy to answer.
Yes, Friedhelm, thank you for your presentation. We have a few questions. The first one is penetration test best possible option to use in the risk assessment process?
Not sure if I got the question right.
Again, is penetration test best possible option to use in the risk assessment process?
It's just part of the risk assessment process, and it just depends on your risk models and your approach to organize the risk assessment. There is, as you know, the ISO 27001 and the 27005 are giving a framework, and they give the general goals, which are to be transparent, to have a clear way how to calculate risk, and that two people who are assessing risk are coming to up to the same conclusions. So that's the bottom line. And what components to include just depends on the organization and needs to be decided on an individual scale. So, of course, penetration tests should be used for risk assessment, but they might not be the only thing you have to use there.
Okay, the second question is, how do you handle false positive from a vulnerability scan report engaging in penetration testing?
Okay, dealing with false positives is not that straightforward. I see two general approaches how to do that. First, you could spend more efforts in order to verify your findings, apply various testing methods, have several experts reviewing. However, this is not always an option because it involves some costs and some time. If you have an estimate about your false positive rate, you could also extend your risk model to take into account that, and that was what I was suggesting here also in my presentation. requires, of course, that you have a calibrated model and that you have good assumptions how to come up with these numbers. And the numbers here from the presentation are not meant to be the only one right numbers you might see there. However, they should give you an indication in what area those numbers would be. How you derive the numbers and how the model looks in detail just depends on your risk assessment methodology you are using, and it just needs to be transparent if you are using any assumptions where they stem from.
Okay, next question is what kind of training or certificate would you recommend to increase tester skill level?
In penetration tests, there are in general two approaches, again, how to do that. And one sort of certifications are only paper-based. That means that you have a multiple choice test, for example, or some other test on paper, which tries to find out about your knowledge. There's another sort of certification, and as far as I know, these are pure certification from OCP, I think, where you have certified your performance in a real pen testing lab, and where the practical tests are judged and scored, and after that you have a certification which is more or less real. And most tests, however, are only paper tests.
Okay, the last question is, does it need much resources to apply pen test?
Yep. I think the correct answer would be, honestly, yes, it depends. Obviously, the scope is to be taken into account, how many objects you have to investigate, and how complex is your platform under investigation. Another factor would be whether it should be easy to identify if there is an attacker or pen tester, or if he needs to obfuscate his activities. The more silent he has to be, the longer the test will be. So there are a lot of parameters which actually are influencing how long a pen test needs to be. And yeah, it's very difficult to come up here with some general numbers.
Okay, thank you, Friedhelm, for giving us this highly informative presentation. I believe the attendees had the chance to learn many new things today, and I suggest you to take time and see our future webinar that we will be hosting. Next Wednesday, we will host a webinar topic which is called Internet of Things, New Identity Access Management System Implementation. You can take time and visit our website, www.pcb.com, on the webinar section to register for our future webinar. Thank you once again, and hope to meet you soon in our future webinars.